Why MAGA is dying. It's just a fact. All right, MAGA is dead. Once Trump leaves, there is no more MAGA. And I'm going to share with you, right, we're going to look at history. I'm going to prove it to you. Same thing's going to happen here. Remember, MAGA is a populist rebellion against the moneyed interests in the Republican Party. That's what MAGA is, all right? MAGA is led by Trump, one of the richest guys are out there, which is kind of odd, but still, at the end of the day, Trump is a MAGA. MAGA is Trump. Once he goes away, there's just not going to be enough standard bearers. Because remember, the Republican establishment, what do they want? They want to make money. Why do Republican politicians go into office? Why do Republican workers for the Republican politicians go into office? It's not to wield power, it's to make money. They will sell their souls to whoever has the highest bid. Now, there are few and far between, and Republicans don't do that, but that's just a fact. Democrats go into office for power. They want to wield power because essentially politics is the religion. Republicans go into office to get wealthy. So anyway, we're going to look at this real quick, and I'm going to give you a history lesson of what was going on back in the late 1880s. Essentially, we had the wealthy elites, the landed classes. We also had merchants. All right, so merchants had taken over a lot of the towns by basically offering essentially you had to trade through them essentially. And what merchants did to farmers back then, because there was not enough liquidity because the money supply was being reduced significantly, which is why we had mass deflation. There was not enough liquidity, and so what happened was the farmers and things would say the local the artisans, the people in their local shops, self-employed people, they had to sell, and they had to sell to a merchant because that was the only basic game in town was a merchant because the old system of bartering wasn't working anymore. So they had to sell to a merchant. Now the merchant though would say, we'll get, well, almost like a consignment. But the merchant also said, I will extend credit to you for your goods that you need in which to grow your crops, but I'm going to charge an interest rate that's exorbitant. An interest rate that's exorbitant. There's not enough cash, so you'll have to pay me at a higher cash once you sell your crops. So if you were thinking you could sell your crops for $100, you're going to have to pay me $80 or something like that. If you have a crop failure, well, it sucks to be you. I have a lien on that crop and a lien on your property. So the merchants were getting bigger and wealthier by the day because there wasn't enough credit to extend for farmers to buy the goods they needed in order to grow their crops. And a lot of these farmers got put out and then became sharecroppers. Anyway, so to fight this, because there's a law, by the way, that the legislator had passed that allowed merchants to take liens on farmers' crops and then land as well. All right. So to fight this, they developed something called the Farmers Alliance. The Farmers Alliance, where they wanted to create these co-op stores so they could bypass the merchants. All right. They wanted to create these co-ops and say, no, man, we're not going to be subject to it. It's kind of like what Mandani is trying to do in New York. I can't stand the guy. He's a clown. It's not going to work, but that's what he's trying to do. All right, he's trying to say, hey, we got to bypass these people who are charging us exuberant fees or exuberant prices. You take that for what it's worth. They tried to do the same thing here in the South, the Farmers Alliance. So what happened was, as we'll see right here, the merchandisers in Milton County, in Milton, Georgia, where I live, used to be part of Milton County, now it's part of Fulton County, successfully blocked the local Alliance Co-op from dealing with Atlanta wholesalers by warning the Atlantans that they, the merchants, would not purchase any goods from stores that would sell to the Alliance store. So we have the merchants saying, hey, we don't want the competition. Remember, the merchants had essentially monopolistic power, sponsored by the legislator here in Georgia, Democrats, by the way. And they said, if you're going to compete, Atlanta wholesalers, if you're going to offer your goods and services to the farmer co-op that's trying to set up shop here in Georgia, we won't do any business with you all, and you will be SOL. So then what we have here, and this will make sense here in just a second when it comes to MAGA. The Georgia Exchange Alliance, all right, which opened its doors in late 1889, significantly expanded the movement's horizons by offering large-scale co-op alternatives to established market structures. So we have a populist revolt against the landed merchant class, the wealthy classes. all right? Because they say, hey, we got to compete against these guys because they're screwing us. No two ways around it. So they started to expand, all right? And so check this out. And that became serious threats to the wealthy landowners and the merchants, deriving surpluses from liens on their tenants' crops while sweeping the alliance into political agitation capable of disrupting the Democratic Party. Because by this time, the Republicans were DOA, and the Democrats the only game in town. So think about what's happening with MAGA, comparing that to the Republican Party. MAGA is trying to essentially pose a serious threat to the wealthy Republican country club elite. All right. But while alliance candidates, populist candidates, MAGA, did obtain more than a healthy share of the state legislative and congressional seats, the organization's rank and file soon discovered that the political offices brought few tangible returns. As Rebecca Latimer Felton later recalled, once many of the self-proclaimed MAGA Republicans, they say Alliance Democrats, took their places in office, she heard no more about the platform and the changes that they ran on. No more. Back then it was essentially making the currency more widespread, replacing the liens that these merchant class had on farmers' crops and lands. We talk about the government-controlled railroads because it's being monopolized by wealthy business people, corporatist, not capitalists. Capitalists have done a very horrible job at defending a capitalism. So right now, capitalism is viewed as corporatism by MAGA as well, should be, and certainly by the Democrats. Capitalism is monopolistic international conglomerates, and that's sad. So we, in the populist MAGA, support small businesses, self-employed people, people working with their hands, blue-collar people, things of that nature. The landed classes of both the Democrats and the Republicans today, they don't support that in the least. But again, Republicans are easier to manipulate because they'll sell their souls for money. Democrats are harder because they want to wield power. So Democrats say, whatever is going to get me to power, that's who I'll be. Republicans say, whatever gets me elected, that's who I'll be. But once I get there, I'll sell my soul to whoever gives you the most money. You see the difference? There's a huge difference there. Let's keep going because this is pretty interesting to me. Notable differences distinguish the populist standard bearers, the MAGA people, versus their Democratic counterparts, the mainstream Republicans. In Jackson County, leading populists not only were more poor than their Democrats, a decided majority had agricultural occupations and rural residences, while most of the Democrats are merchants of the professional class and live in the town districts. Again, same thing. MAGA Republicans are rural, all right? They most work with their hands, a lot of small independent business owners, where the Republican base is what? They're going to be the corporatists, unequivocally, the mid-level executives of businesses that are international. They live more in the urban areas. They're not living in the rural districts. They're living more in downtown Alpharetta, while the MAGA is going to be out there in Cherokee County, for instance. All right. Evidence from Carroll County on land ownership points at analogous partisan distinctions. Of members on respective party committees, executive committees, Democrats had considerably more substantial land holdings. 40% owned real estate assessed at over $1,000 back then, this in late 1800s, and almost 30% owned over 200 acres. Among populist MAGA executive committee men, however, fewer than 1/4 owned land over $1,000, and only 1/5 owned over 200 acres. Upcountry Democrats, and this is the rural areas, like had their base in town districts. All right, so this is the more rural areas, but even the more rural areas, the rural Democrats, in this case, the Republican landed classes, had their base in the wealthier areas. Upcountry Democrats in Jackson County, Milton County, whatnot, had their base in town districts because they were the wealthy part of the merchant class. No different than the Republicans today, the wealthy merchant class of today. The populists had their strength in the countryside and particularly in the poor rural districts. Town districts consistently back the Democrats, while most rural districts back the populists. Again, the wealthy, more urban areas for Republicans are going to back the Republicans. The conservative areas are going to back the Republicans. The rural places back the populists, the MAGA people. In the countryside, populist reigns triumphant. Amassing nearly 70% of the votes, was exact opposite in the more urban areas for the Democrats. And again, the same thing with MAGA. Because even though MAGA sounds like it's not in any cities, well, Sandy Springs, Alpharetta, absolutely. There'll be tons of MAGA people in these places, without question. It's out in the rural areas, more rural areas, which MAGA lives. But the country club Republicans are going to live in Sandy Springs. They're going to live in downtown Alpharetta. They're going to live in wherever what's it called? Not just saying, whatever it is, Peachtree City and stuff like that. They're not out there in freaking Rome, Georgia, for instance. I think that's right here. The prominent Georgia populist, Tom Watson, who forcefully argued that the economic woes shared by white and black farmers alike demanded cooperative political endeavor. The crushing burden which now oppress both races in the South will cause each to see a similarity of cause and similarity of remedy, he contended. They will recognize that each should help the other in the work of repealing bad laws and enacting good ones. Such broad lines of mutual interest did become increasingly apparent to many upcountry whites after Reconstruction, as the rise of the staple agricultural transformed social relations and jeopardized the independence of small landowners. So again, back then the populists like, we got to reach out to our black brothers because our black brothers are dealing with the same oppressive laws that we're dealing with, all right? Kind of what MAGA is trying to do here. We're trying to reach out to the blacks. We recognize we only have so many Republicans we can capture. We got to bring new people to the Republican side for MAGA. And so back then, the populists trying to reach out to the blacks. And what happened here? More than a few populists looked to narrowing the racial divide. Thus, in an effort to recruit local blacks, the People's Party in Jackson County opened meetings to both races. They welcomed black delegates to their county conventions and invited a black speaker from Atlanta. Blacks contributed significant electoral support to the populist candidates, who were uniformly white. The sympathetic Dallas Herald of Paulding County found that the People's Party colored men did splendid work at the polls in 1894 and 1895 and praised their courage in face of protests, persuasions, and employment of all manner of means by the Democrats, means of divide by the Democrats. Yet black political leaders, and doubtless many of their followers, approached the Populist Party with some caution and skepticism. For one thing, abandoning the Republican Party. Again, switch Republicans to Democrats today. Abandoning the Republican Party and its potential network of patronage in favor of a new party whose prospects were uncertain carried risks. Furthermore, numerous blacks justifiably charged that the populists, the MAGA, paid minimal, if any, attention to the special needs of the black community. One announced that he voted for the Democrats in the state election because the populists ignored the issues of public schools, which is the only hope colored people have. Perhaps more important, steering a considerable number of blacks away from the populist was the reputation of bitter racism that the party's white constituency had earned. So basically, again, the Republican Party is looked at as racist by the blacks. So no matter what you do, you might be able to capture some, but as long as they continue to look at you as racist, guess what? You're not going to make many inroads. And wealthy classes, they don't need the blacks. They're like, hey, we're just here to get wealthy. We don't care about the state of the country. So we're not even going to try to make that bridge to appeal to populist blacks. We're not going to try because we're good. We're good where we are right now. So you have the legacy of racism that for some reason the Republican Party has been put on. You're going to try to overcome that by being Republican, but you're saying, but we're not like those guys over there. Even the Republican Party was a party of abolition anyway. The whole thing is crazy. And yet there it is. So you're not going to make inroads on the blacks because you're already perceived as a Republican that you're racist. And as such, the only thing you have is your populism, and that will win you votes initially, but then your legislatures, once they win election, will abandon you just like that because they're just there to sell their soul for rock and roll, man. And no matter what you do, you're going to lose. We have in this country two dangerous classes, a Southern populist said. On one hand, a band of capitalist conspirators who enjoy special advantages which they are determined to maintain and increase even at the cost of involving the nation to ruin. The other, homeless and friendless, goaded to desperation by the teaching of designing men and clamoring for something they do not understand themselves, filled with a desire by reign of riot and confusion to establish a new order of things based on some kind of value, chimerical value. I don't know what that means. Same thing here, man. We have the capitalistic class, corporatist class, who doesn't want anything to do with the populist. And then we're trying to go over there to appeal to a more general populist party, the blacks, working men, and things of that nature, who would naturally have a distrust of the Republican Party as a whole. And you might gather some. The question is, you're going to gather enough to overcome the capitalist class, the corporatist that runs the Republican Party. And the answer is just no, you're not gonna, man. You're not gonna. And as such, while we have a little bit of a run here, it's kind of like, will the Reform Party in the UK actually beat the Tories? Maybe for a little bit, but Tories will always be there. The Republicans will always be there. The populists will always be on the outside looking in. And the same thing's going to happen to MAGA, man. It just is, because the nature of the beast is the politicians who you think are supporting you, the Trey Gowdies of the world, who you thought Dan Crenshaws, they're going to do our bidding. It turns out they just get to Congress and they don't care. The only reason they even said anything MAGA-based was to win. And then when they win, they get paid, dude. Same thing happened in the 1880s, 1890s. Same thing's going to happen now. And the same thing's going to happen to the Democratic Socialists, too. Same exact thing. So don't put your hopes in politics. As my man Matt McKinley from the Quantum of Conscience says, your only change is through you. You got to make the change. If you're hoping politics will do it, you're going to be forever disappointed. All right. God bless. I love your thoughts. Smash.